Brilliant. So I can just make sure we're recording, everything's good to go. Marvelous. Well, welcome, folks. I hope you can hear me okay. My name's Luke. I'm the W Club manager, as most of you know, although I can see a few new faces on this call. So if this is your first Digital Drams, thank you for joining. Welcome. We want these tastings to be as interactive as possible. So do get your tasting notes, your questions in the chat. Don't be shy. Do keep them coming. I suppose. The only last thing I'll say before I pass over to you, Sebastian, would be that at the end we'll be giving out a 15% discount or code for 15% discount on all the SKUs we've tasted tonight, all the different whiskies. So worth sticking to the end to get that, and you can enjoy some of these drams again in full size after tonight. So marvelous. That's enough for me. So Sebastian, do you want to introduce yourself and your own maybe your story before coming to Glasgow and how long you've been there and that side of things?
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks for inviting us on to do this tasting, and it's a pleasure to be introducing these whiskies to you all. I hope you enjoy them. We've got five really interesting different styles of single malt that we make at Glasgow Distillery to try tonight. I've worked at the Glasgow Distillery for over 7 years, and my role there, I'm head of marketing and sales. So I look after about 28 different international markets, getting our product into those markets and promoting it, as well as I look after our design, our packaging, anything involving communications, and I'm also part of the blending team as well. There's three of us that put all these products together. So happy to say that everything that we're going to be trying tonight, I've had a hand in creating. So no pressure. I hope you enjoy. Um, so I guess what we could do, I don't want to rabble on too long before we get stuck into jam number one. So I'll just quickly talk through the order that we're going to try these whiskies in tonight, and then we can get fired straight into number one. And then I'll give you a brief overview of the distillery. So we're going to start with triple distilled, which is one of our core range products. We're going to follow that up with the original, is dram number two. Number three will be Tokai cask finish. Number four, sorry, will be our peated core range, and we're going to finish this evening on our cognac cask finish, 58%.
Marvelous.
Yeah. So the five whiskies that we have tonight showcase our three core range products and then some of the small batch limited edition products that we put out periodically throughout the year. Dram number one, if everyone's got that in the glass, is the core range triple distilled. It's got a lovely light blue label. This is what the 70cl bottle looks like. So our core range products, they're all 46% ABV. Everything we do is natural color, non-chill filtered. And this triple distilled whiskey is predominantly bourbon cask matured. It's about 96% first fill and refill bourbon casks, and about 4% of the cask makeup is virgin American white oak. So just a little hint of virgin oak in there to beef out the complexity and to add some light peppery spice in there as well. As the name suggests, this is a triple distilled whiskey, so it goes 3 times through our stills, and it gives us this really bright, nice, effervescent, light, really creamy and easy drinking style of single malt whiskey. So on the nose, immediately you get a lot of those bourbon casks working quite hard. So honey, butterscotch, vanilla. On the palate, very smooth, quite bright, vibrant, quite easy drinking. So as you guys are enjoying that, I'll just give you a quick couple minutes on the Glasgow Distillery, who we are, and what we do. I am presuming, and you can say in the chat if this isn't true, but I'm presuming that the Glasgow Distillery might be a new distillery for quite a lot of people on the call, which is great. Our distillery was founded in 2012, so we're part of that new wave of single malt whiskey distilleries in Scotland, similar in age to the guys at Nickneen, Razzie, a year younger than Ardnamurchan, and other distilleries such as Kingsbarns, Lockley, etc. So quite an exciting time in the Scotch whisky industry over the last 10, 15 years. A lot of these new distilleries popping up and showcasing some really interesting products. We started our distillery in 2012, and our first whisky came off the still in 2015. It was founded by two friends, Liam and Mike, who saw an opportunity to bring whisky production back to Glasgow, single malt. We take our name from the original Glasgow Distillery Company that was founded in the year 1770, hence the 1770 that adorns our single malt whiskey labels. The original Glasgow Distillery was one of the biggest in the world for quite a long time, and they used to make 3 different styles of single malt whiskey there. They used to make triple distilled single malts, double distilled single malts unpeated, and also peated single malts as well. And these are the 3 styles that we make at our distillery today. They closed, unfortunately, in 1902, but they were one of about 30 working distilleries in Glasgow. So the city used to be this real hub of whiskey making, a real kind of engine powerhouse of Scotch whisky. In 1902, the Glasgow Distillery, which was at that time called Dundas Hill, got mothballed. And between 1902 and 2012, there was no new independent single malt whiskey distillery started in Glasgow. There was a little bit of single malt production done at Strathclyde Distillery in the 40s and 50s, I think, and that was called Kinclaith, which you can still find now and again. But in terms of a new dedicated whiskey distillery, there wasn't a new one built in over 110 years when we started. So we're very happy to bring whiskey production back to Glasgow. And alongside our single malts, we make a range of gin, vodka, rum, and we have a blended malt whiskey as well. So we're a small team. There's 16 of us in the company, full-time staff, and that covers 7 full-time distillers. We've got a full-time cooper who works on site as well. And then the rest of us do roles, everything you need to run a small business, really, across logistics, a little bit of sales, finance, operations, things like that. So a small team producing a broad range of different styles of products. And our distillery is located in Hillington Industrial Estate. So it's a rather picturesque location just on the outskirts of Glasgow. You'd more likely find car dealerships and tile shops as opposed to malt whiskey distilleries on our location, but it's a very convenient place for us to begin. And we decided to operate there because we could get up and running, we could get producing whiskey quite quickly, and we could start getting our products onto market fairly quickly too. So it's a location that suits our needs, and it's a location that very much kind of imbibes and embodies the Glasgow Distillery as a company. We're not pretentious. We don't spend money where it's not needed to be spent, if I can put it like that. We put all of our money into our casks, into our spirit, and into our staff. So unfortunately, we're not open for tours. We don't have a visitor centre or a shop on site. We just focus on making the best quality products we can and getting them to market. So that's a quick overview. Any questions, Luke? Anything I should have maybe mentioned there?
Yeah, we've got some great tasting notes coming in here. We've got getting caramelized pineapples, says Paul. Banana sweets, says Stephen Sir. Breakfast whiskey, says Dave. I have to agree. It's definitely got elements of that to it. Pear drops for me. Some stewed apples and pear drop, says Frank D. Pear drops as well. Pear drop seems to be quite a common one. Honeyed pears, fresh, light and fruity, touch of spice in the finish. So the first dram seems to be going down quite well. In terms of obviously the time, it's my own question on the fascinating introduction you've given there. In terms of that 110-year period you say since the first new distillery opened in Glasgow, why do you think, seeing as it was a major population centre and industrial hub, why do you think whiskey distilling didn't kind of crop up more like it did in, like, let's say at the same period? Because obviously 1770 is kind of almost a demarker as to where modern whiskey emerges in that period, and we kind of start seeing something that we recognize as whiskey. And from an Irish context, they were all, well, not all, but the predominantly urban distilleries. Obviously the opposite happened in Scotland. Why do you think Glasgow didn't have a distillery in all that time?
Well, yeah, I mean, the Glasgow Distillery was one of the very first, if not the first, legally licensed distilleries in Scotland. But around about 1902, you had obviously the lead up to 2 great wars. You had the impact of prohibition in the States, and also Glasgow as a city growing quite exponentially. So a lot of these kind of industries that were relying on a lot of farmland, for example, that used to be quite close in and around Glasgow, a lot of these distilleries got pushed up north, got pushed out west. So we saw quite a drop off in terms of actually urban distilleries located in and around the big city areas of Scotland.
Marvelous.
So yeah.
Yeah, well, Frank D said, yes, spice and a bit of ginger biscuit on the finish. Definitely the more I sit with it, the more kind of spicy notes come out compared to the kind of notes people are getting early on in terms of peach and honeyed. So this is triple distilled. Could you tell us maybe more about that and the kind of thoughts behind that?
Absolutely. So the way we split our core range 3 whiskies, each of our core range whiskies represents the 3 styles of production that we do each year. So unlike the majority of whiskey distilleries in Scotland who produce one style of spirit throughout the year and then rely on different cask maturations or different ages to create their different styles of whiskey, we actually split our production year into 3 distinct periods. So for a third of the year, we'll produce just triple distilled unpeated whiskey. For a third of the year, we'll produce double distilled unpeated, and then a third of the year peated. And so every distillery in Scotland, the way we like to think of it is every distillery has the power to be able to use different casks to give their whiskies different flavor. But what we're able to do by having three different distillates, three different core DNAs that run through our production, is have the power of those three different new make styles. And these three different new make spirit styles from the very beginning give us three totally different flavor profiles in our distillery and in what we're able to put out on the market. And so as opposed to just having one core style, by having three, we're exponentially able to widen the flavor profiles that we're able to create. And when the distillery was starting, a big part of the thought behind the distillery and what type of whiskey we were going to produce, it wasn't so much a consideration of, well, it's a lowland distillery, so we have to make a lowland style of whiskey. It was about showcasing that contemporary Scotch whisky distilling can be creating these super light, bright, really kind of vibrant and smooth styles, like we've got with this triple distilled, all the way down to these big, rich, smoky and oily styles like we're going to have with some of our peated whiskies. So really showcasing that maybe the regions are not potentially as definitive as they maybe once were, or maybe as we've been led to believe in whiskey marketing traditionally, and just showcasing that a good quality whiskey distillery can be producing this real broad range of flavor. And we tend to find that our audience, the people that connect with our whiskey, are the enthusiasts and the enthusiasts who like to try all these different styles coming from one particular producer. So the reason why we chose to do triple distilled as well as the unpeated double distilled and the peated is it gives us this really light, really clean, really kind of citrus forward style of spirit that comes off the still. And this gives us the ability to produce these really clean, easy drinking, very much the breakfast whiskey vibe that somebody highlighted in the chat there, those styles of whiskies. And so we tend to release more of these styles of whiskies during the kind of spring and summer months. And then we tend to release more peated, smokier whiskies towards the winter months. But yeah, that's how our core range of three is split. It celebrates three different styles of spirit production. And we're one of only a handful of distilleries in Scotland are actually doing those three styles in the one building. It's almost like having three different distilleries using the same equipment under one roof. And this isn't just the fact that for one of these production processes, we're using peated barley or non-peated barley, or that one's gone through a still one more time. It's three totally different recipes. So we're talking different yeast strains, importantly, different cut points when we're capturing the hearts of the spirit, and different styles of maturation after that as well. So the triple distilled, one of the reasons why it is so bright and why it is so smooth is because when we capture the hearts, that's our new make spirit, the product that's going into the cask, we capture the alcohol at a very high percentage. So we cut our hearts, we stop collecting the hearts at 75% alcohol, which is a very high cut point in Scotch whisky. For a double distilled unpeated, we're cutting at 63, so it gives us quite a rich, fruity style. And then for a peated, we're cutting at 57%, which is quite low. So it's really oily, and you're getting a lot more of those big, oilier characteristics on the mouthfeel. So with triple distilled, we're going twice through our spirit still because we have two sets of two stills, which can make making a triple distilled whiskey quite challenging. But we go once through our larger wash still, which is 2,500 litres, and then twice through our spirit still. Once through that spirit still, we're capturing all of our kind of intermediate low wines, if you like, and then we're running the third distillation where we're making that high cut point to capture that bright, really fruity, citrus forward new make, and we're filling that predominantly into first fill bourbon casks.
Marvelous. It's interesting that you obviously attribute the cut point as being so crucial rather than, like you'd assume that people were saying, oh, just the extra copper contact, but you're actually making that difference in cut as well, which is fascinating. There's a few Irish distilleries that do that as well, and it's amazing, as I'm sure we'll see as we move through this range in terms of the different styles that you produce a different flavor. But it's amazing even just that cut point alone, the difference that can make in the kind of flavor outcome.
It really does, absolutely. And I think maybe in Scotch whisky, I can't speak for Irish, but maybe people don't talk as much about the spirit creation as most of the concentration on the communication is all about the casks used. But actually the creation of the spirit has a much larger impact on the final product than maybe we're traditionally led to believe.
Yeah, and obviously much more recently people talk about terroir and that. It's also interesting that the still size is also interesting for a triple distill. They tend to be historically have been larger stills, and I don't know if it's apocryphal, but the extra round of distillation was to compensate for the lack of copper contact from the sheer volume of the stills, as opposed to it actually being like, oh, if we distill it one more time, it will taste, you know, better, and that's what we want. It's actually, no, we're compensating for a limitation in the scale of our production. So yeah, no, it's really fascinating taste, and a gorgeous whiskey, as people are commenting on the thing. Frank Deese is reminding me of a young Glen Cadam in a good way. Richard Shepherd is really coming alive now with a drop of water and thyme. I get the breakfast malt, getting golden syrup and vanilla. This is like a big bowl of fruit salad with fresh cream, says David. So yeah, excellent tasting notes. So it sounds like people are really enjoying it. I'm just going to check the price of that there on our website. So 1 second. So it's £53, as the next one will come on to. The original is after the discount is applied, which we get at the end, that will be £45 for anyone looking to pick up a bottle of this. So yeah, well, I mean, for a £45 whiskey, it really ticks a lot of boxes. Roger says water opens up lovely spices. So I might try that myself. So obviously the 1770s on the label of these is a nod to when you first opened. Maybe before we come on to the original, is there anything else on the triple distilled you thought might be worth kind of exciting to share or something?
Well, what I would say is, maybe if it's not too late to say this, try and keep some of the triple in your glass, if you've not finished it, because what we're going to come on to next is the original, which is the same strength alcohol. It's a similar cask maturation, though not exactly, and I'll come on to that. But what we really can tell by trying them side by side is the influence of that third distillation compared to the double distillation. So if I may, bring us on to dram number 2.
Yeah.
The original. So this is this red bottle that we've got here. Again, 46% alcohol. Whereas the triple distilled whiskey is a marriage of different cask types. Like I said, about 96% bourbon, a mixture of first fill and refill, and 4% virgin oak. Every cask that goes into a vatting to make the original has been double matured. So aged initially in first fill bourbon casks coming from Heaven Hill Distillery, and then finished for at least 6 months. It's usually 6 to 8 months in fresh American white oak casks. So it's a virgin oak finish for every cask that goes into this. So like I say, a similar cask makeup to the triple distilled, but what you initially get on the nose is it's much richer. It's much darker. If the triple distilled is like the fresh fruit and it's like green apples and pears, for me, the original is like dark berries, red apple, richer, darker. And where you really tell the difference between triple distillation and double distillation is across the palate, because this has a much more robust mouthfeel. It's much more structured. And with the triple distillation, we do that third distillation to strip away the heavier, oilier compounds in the spirit to get that super smooth, bright, light style. With the original, everything we stripped away with the triple, we've maintained in the double distillation. And we've kept that in there to give you that much more robust, structured mouthfeel. So dark fruits, rich caramel, and then there's that black pepper spice at the back of the palate, which makes for a really nicely balanced style of single malt.
Yeah, definitely much more spicy, at least at the initial sip. The kind of spice took a while to come out of the triple distilled. Paul says apple and blackberry crumble on first taste, which I think is a great taste.
Yeah,
because it has those kind of the blackberry fruitiness, but also that kind of slight sour is maybe the wrong word, but that kind of there's something there as well that kind of tingles in addition to the spice.
absolutely. A lot. So initially with this, you get a lot of that bourbon cask character coming through. So that kind of rich caramel, the kind of toffee, the vanilla. But what the virgin oak adds is these big dark fruits, and it adds that little bit of spice as well. And virgin oak is quite important to us in our core range. So our core 3 whiskies all have an element of virgin oak maturation in them. And our virgin oak comes from a very specific supplier. So we take all of our virgin oak from a cooperage in Kentucky called Kelvin Cooperage. And Kelvin Cooperage was started in the 60s by a gentleman that went and trained to become an apprentice cooper at the same time as the cooper that works at our distillery, Shug. Oh, his name's Hugh, but in Glasgow, if your name's Hugh, you get called Shug. I'm not sure why. I've never found out. So they trained to they were apprentice coopers together in the 60s. And Shug joined Diageo and eventually ended up with us at Glasgow Distillery. Whereas the other gentleman started Kelvin Cooperage on the banks of the River Kelvin that runs through Glasgow and joins the Clyde. In the 90s, he moved him and his family and his cooperage to Kentucky to be closer to the bourbon and the wine industries over there. So when we were looking for new, fresh American oak casks to use, we thought, who better than this Glaswegian family-owned business in Kentucky, now run by his two sons, and bring their cask back to Glasgow and fill it with the first new whiskey, single malt in Glasgow for over 100 years. So it's a nice kind of showcase of that symbiosis that exists between the US and Scotland and cooperage and distillery and wood and spirit coming together.
Yeah, and obviously Heaven Hill you said was the original bourbon casks before they went to the Virgin Oak.
Yeah, so
So
predominantly Heaven Hill. It's not always the case. There's sometimes some Four Roses or some Wild Turkey in there, but I'd say about 90% of what we get is Heaven Hill.
Well, you missed the trick not calling the whiskey Kelvin Hill. It's a part of Glasgow for anyone who's not aware. But the yeah, no, it's really interesting. For the Virgin Oak, it's nowhere near as tannic as you might kind of expect it to be.
Yeah.
But it's it's lovely. The Ian says getting butterscotch and creme brulee on the palate with this one.
Yeah.
Charred pears as well, much thicker mouthfeel, much more robust dram than triple distilled. Toffee apple, some cinnamon, says Frank D. So yeah, some great molasses as well, said Roger. Brown sugar from the crumble, and David's already got water in it. He says water opens it up. It's got legs.
Nice.
Fabulous.
Yeah, I totally agree. This is what's lovely is to showcase that difference between the spirit creation types, like I was saying earlier. So you really do see in these two whiskeys side by side that difference, that the triple distillation versus the double distillation, using the same malt, slightly different yeast strains, and that lower cut point all creates this larger, more robust style. The Virgin Oak, yes, it's not overpowering, and we find that 6 months is just the right amount of time for this style of single malt that we produce. Any longer, and you can get too bitter characteristics coming through. It can get too tannic. It's almost like, and we've sampled some of our casks that we've left for too long, and it's almost like when you make a cup of tea and you leave your tea bag in there for too long, and it just gets a bit kind of spicy and tannic and not that pleasant. But 6 months just rounds off this whiskey really nicely and complements the other characteristics that already exist in there.
Yeah, well, I'll let you in on a little secret. I leave my tea bag in for the entire process. Drink my tea. Honest to God, pop the hot water in, tiniest drop of milk just to change the color, and then leave the tea bag in right to the bitter end. And it's often literally a bitter end.
I can imagine.
The Steph and Sarah said more doughy, like a muffin, fresh berries, touch of cream, lovely red berry finish. Me, much better than the triple distilled. Much more after dinner malt than triple distilled, says Frank. I suppose that is the advantage of. I mean, it's like chalk and cheese in terms of the lot of the flavors and the mouthfeel has been mentioned. But it has that variety because as was mentioned there about it being an after dinner whiskey, it's a whiskey for a very different occasion than triple distilled, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think if we look at triple distilled like the breakfast whiskey, I would say this is actually more like our lunchtime style, and we'll be
Yeah.
getting on to dinner shortly.
The 3 o'clock slump whiskey.
Yeah, that's it.
Brilliant. And this is obviously the same price on our website as the triple distilled, so the same discounts. You're getting it for around £45, and obviously free shipping in with your W Club membership, folks. So don't forget that too. And in terms of the bottle design, Sebastian, in terms of that kind of the blue for this and the tall shape, the lovely ridges in it as you're holding up there. What was the idea behind that? What was the inspiration for the style?
Yeah, so we always knew we needed, as one of the newer, younger distilleries in a competitive market, a eye-catching design to stand out. So we took the inspiration from Glasgow and its Art Deco architecture and the way the kind of city looks to inspire the bottle. So it's quite tall, it stands quite high. It's got these ridges across the glass, so a bespoke bottle design. So it feels great in hand as well. So it feels very, very tactile. And yeah, reminiscent of the architecture of our city. In the heel or in the foot, we've got these, I'm not sure if you can make it out, but there's these kind of rivets in there, inspired by Glasgow's rich kind of heritage with shipbuilding. And around the neck here, we've got on all of our core range bottles, we've got tasting notes, really easy to read tasting notes, which are all around the neck. On every bottle as well, we have these taste signifiers, which just fall beneath the main name of the bottle. And all of these elements, these like hints to what's inside the bottle, it's all part of accessibility for us. So we're trying to showcase that whiskey is not just for people who know exactly what's in the bottle. You can see this on a shelf and understand by reading what's on the packaging, what you can expect from drinking this whiskey. So accessibility comes in many forms. We overly flowery or exuberant with the language that we use when we describe these bottles. You know, we're quite straightforward, down to earth in how we describe our whiskies. But also accessibility can come across in price point too. So these are all quite well priced, affordable whiskies on the market. And at a time when you're just seeing prices of whiskey increasing, exponentially, we've been holding our prices since when we launched. So these whiskies are all around about the £50 mark, and our special limited edition releases are all around the £60 mark. So we try and keep everything as accessibly priced as we can.
Mm-hmm. No, and are you going to have a word with Beyonce Knowles about stealing your bottle design?
Well, I mean, yeah, I guess that's an element of flattery, isn't it? Beyonce must have seen something she liked.
Yeah, definitely. David has asked the age of the liquid.
Yeah, so within the core range of whiskies that we make, the triple distilled, the original, the peated, the age changes batch to batch. So the whiskies that we're trying tonight, they're probably between 4 and 5 years old from these particular batches, but each batch is a little bit different. So we do have on the back label batch numbers on every single bottling that we do. So you can see slight differences between them batch to batch, and that's just celebrating the nature of how we operate. And as a small distillery, you are going to get those slight batch variances. In our small batch series and limited edition bottlings, they all bear an age statement. And the two that we're going to try tonight are 6 years old. We've had some 7 and 8 year olds out as well. Our whiskey first was distilled in 2015. So we do have some 10-year-old liquids coming next year. However, in that first year in 2015, it was very much get the distillery up and running, and there wasn't a huge amount of casks filled. So if and when we do some type of celebration of 10, it'd be a pretty small limited release. But the age profile within these bottles is getting older and older. Every year we're unlocking older and older stock that's going into this core range product, as well as our limited editions. And I think what we're trying to showcase is, like all the new distilleries that are doing some great work, is that age isn't the only signifier of quality when it comes to the whiskey. A lot of it comes down to the quality of the distillate, and obviously the quality of the casks that we're using too. And what we'll find tonight from going through all these bottles is the casks are very active and they're very good quality. There's a lot of first fills, there's a lot of virgin oak. We're getting into some first fill PX as well later on.
And maybe as we kind of slowly start coming on to the Tokai, people want to pour and get ready, or there's no panic. In terms of where you are based in Hillington, obviously the challenges of being in an urban environment. How do you find things like water source and that side of things? Was that a challenge when you're opening up? Is it a challenge now, or
not really? I mean, we use Glasgow's municipal water supply, basically, aka tap water. That's ionized and filtered, obviously, before we use it, so it's good for production. But we're blessed in Glasgow to have great soft water, so it's actually a really good water source for us. The water comes from Lochcatron, about 35 miles north of the city, and that's what feeds the majority of Glasgow with its drinking water. So water, certainly not an issue. Our location, despite it being on an industrial estate, and that's not your typical location for a whiskey distillery, I would say we're very much not really your typical distillery anyway. And the location just allows us to create good quality liquid. And we don't have the issues that people like Nick Neen that you went up to see recently. I've heard some of their stories about how they were building the distillery and being so isolated and how much trouble that can cause. So the distillery site is a very practical one. And while it's not very pretty or beautiful, last time I checked, there wasn't a correlation between a beautiful distillery and a good quality liquid. And we always say, the proof is in the juice. So let's let that do the talking for us. And instead of spending the limited capital that we had in the early days on building a big kind of glossy center, we put all of that money into casks, into the spirit creation, into the stills, and into the staff. And we thought, let's focus on making good quality products first, and the rest will come in time. We're in a long business here. Nothing works quickly in whiskey, and I think the most important thing is to have a good quality product.
No, certainly, and you're warehousing on site as well, are you?
Yeah, the majority of warehousing we have on site. We also use third-party warehouses in and around Glasgow as well. So where we don't maybe have the space for everything ourselves, we use partners in Hillington, the industrial estate we're on, some in Cumbernauld, some in East Kilbride, all kind of satellite towns around Glasgow. Our bottling's all done in and around Glasgow as well, and the majority of all the elements that come into the packaging are all sourced from in and around Glasgow too. So as much as possible, where we can, we source everything from as locally as possible. A bit harder when we get into talking about the peat and things like that, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
No, certainly. Marvelous. So will we come on to the Tokai?
Let's do it. Okay, so this is the Tokai cask finish. This is part of our Glasgow 1770 small batch series. So the small batch series is released roughly 3 to 4 times a year, and we tend to do 2 to 3 bottles in each release. And this is basically, like the name suggests, small batches of interesting cask finishes. So really concentrating on the type of wood that's used. These are a revolving door of different limited editions that really just showcases what we're working on at any one time in the distillery. Tokai is a Hungarian dessert wine, so a sweet white wine, after dinner wine from Hungary. And it's made in a very similar way that French Sauterne is made. So a similar grape that's been affected by a specific rot, a noble rot that causes the grape to raisin, and you get this really nice sweet characteristic coming through. And we've used Tokai across our peated whiskies, our triple distilled whiskies before, but this is all unpeated double distilled. So on the small batch series, we call out on the front whether it's peated, unpeated, or triple distilled, and sometimes we blend those different distillates together as well, which we're going to come on to. But for this particular release, Tokai cask finish, it's 54.8%. It's 4 casks that we combine together, so it's got an outturn of 1,300 bottles. There's only about 120 bottles left in the UK. And this is batch number 2. So it's the second time we've done Tokai with unpeated whiskies. It's a 6-year-old release, bottled in June 24, so quite new. And yeah, priced around the £60 mark. I'm not sure what it's on Whisky Shop for, maybe 62 or so.
64. So after the discount, you get it for 54.40.
Okay, so that's pretty good value for 54.8% whiskey, limited edition. So this has been initially matured in first fill bourbon casks. The majority of the whiskey in here has been in bourbon casks for 4 years, but some of the bourbon casks are a little bit younger, hence the 6 age. 3 of the 4 casks were, I think, 8 years old. One of them was 6, so it's a 6-year-old whiskey. So initial maturation in those Heaven Hill first fill bourbons, and then it's a secondary maturation period, even though we've said finish on the label, of 3.5 years in these Tokai hogshead casks. Tokai, like I said, that sweet white wine, and what you really get on the nose here is you get a lot of that floral sweetness coming through initially. So it's got that rich caramel nose, that kind of floral Manuka honey vibe coming on. And you get a really nice kind of thick, fruity, sweet characteristic coming through. Tokai is a really interesting style of cask to use because it's fruity and it's really funky. So you get this really funky tropical fruit character that comes through. Yes, it's very sweet, and it's not everyone's cup of tea when it's so sweet, but we really enjoy that thick kind of honeyed characteristic with that tropical fruit. For me, there's quite a lot of pineapple, a little bit of papaya and mango, kind of like overripe fruit coming through. And then you get a little bit of that kind of white pepper spice on the back too.
Definitely, yeah, white pepper. You get that dryness. It's totally different than the rest. It's actually quite a punch initially when you taste it. Not in terms of punchy as a whiskey, but the jump up from the double distilled. But yeah, once you kind of let it settle in your mouth, it's a lot of complexity to it. Interesting. Ian says big honey and fruity floral notes on the palate, nutmeg and pepper spice on the finish. Frank is quite gentle and easy for a 54%, so obviously opposite to what I just said, but it is it is very interesting. It's got something like and I mean this in a positive way, like a crab apple, kind of stewed apple type of thing to it. I know stewed apple is a tasting note that people who join these tasting lot probably know I throw around a lot, but and it gets thrown around the whiskey industry a lot, but it's really got that something on the finish that really has that kind of stewed apple-y kind of cooking apple kind of flavor. Paula says peachy, peppery, and leathery for me. So yeah, no, it's definitely interesting, and interesting to see people getting very different things from it as well, from nutmeg to leather. Yeah, and it's good in terms of deciding for. I know we're going to come on to the cognac cask as well in a bit, but the kind of decision around, you talked about kind of putting capital and extra resources into casks and that. How's that kind of decision making process gone? What was the idea to use Tokai, for example? What was the inspiration?
So from the very beginning, we wanted to experiment with as many casks as possible because as a brand new distillery making a new distillate, we weren't quite sure what kind of characteristics we were going to get in terms of combination of different styles of spirit with different types of wood. So we still buy pretty much everything we can legally fill while still calling it Scotch whisky. So we buy a large amount of specialty casks throughout the year across beers, wines, different styles of fortified wine, your ports, sherries, Marsala, Madeira. We do a lot of these, a lot of Tokai. We do a lot of different, basically, like I say, tequila and mezcal, anything we can still fill and legally call Scotch. And what we'll try with those different cask types is we'll fill a third of them with unpeated whiskey, a third of them with peated whiskey, and a third with triple distilled whiskey. And it's really interesting to try them after 3, 4 years and to see the total difference, even though if they're sister casks, they're casks that arrive together, they should be very similar. Obviously, the difference between peated and unpeated is pretty obvious, but the totally different experiences when you're comparing triple distilled and double distilled go into these different casks. So we're still having a lot of fun ourselves in the distillery, experimenting with the different styles of spirit with all these different cask influences. So when we buy a parcel of interesting casks, let's say we buy 12 Tokai casks, we'll split that 12 into three for those three different spirit types, but we'll also split those threes into two. So for half of that third, bear with me, we'll fill that with a new make spirit, so fresh spirit off the still, and for half of it we'll use for finishing. So most of our small batch releases are cask finishes at the moment, but a lot of the releases in the future will be full-term matured whiskies in these different specialty casks. And Tokai is one that over the last couple of years we found a lot of success with just because it's so interesting and it's quite peculiar. It gives you that funky, fruity character, and we're always trying to look for something that's kind of funky and interesting. That's kind of the whole point of the small batch series, is just to show off our different styles of whiskey with different interesting maturations. And we're having we're having a lot of fun with it as well. So we're able to show again the versatility of the whiskies that we're making at Glasgow across not just the spirit types but the cask maturations. The Like I say, most of the cask finishes or most of the releases we're doing in a small batch of cask finishes, but in about a month's time we'll have a 7-year-old full-term matured peated whiskey and a really interesting fortified wine cask coming out, and a few other interesting ones landing as well. So there's a lot of interesting releases coming out of the distillery, and we find that these small batch products they sell out quite quickly. They're quite popular as people start to enjoy the different experimentations and the different styles.
Especially
In
at that
terms
price
of
point as well. We got some great taste notes coming in there. David Miller says lots of honey, mead, overripe pineapple, and the longer it sits in the glass, the more honey mead I get, especially on the nose. It kind of comes through. Bob says nicest Tokai finish whiskey I've had. Perhaps the long maturation has contributed to this versus a normal short finish. Definitely getting Manuka honey and white pepper. Great tasting note there from Anthony. David says sea salt and caramel dripped in honey, which says loads going on. Could sit with this for a while. Black tea, another great taste note there from Nick around a campfire. David Miller says, assuming Tokai casks will also be Hungarian oak. Are they Hungarian oak as well?
Yeah, as far as we're aware, as far as we can tell, and as much information as we get from the supplier of the casks, yes.
Marvelous. And Rab says, lovely finish, sweet fruity with the pepper going. Get the stewed apples. Marvelous. Sorry, I cut you off there a moment ago, Sebastian. You were going to say something else about the casks.
Yeah, no, just the stewed apples is interesting, like you mentioned as well. I do get that. For me, it's also like a kind of dried apricots or like an apricot jam. It's got that real kind of thicker mouthfeel. And then a few people have said nutmeg and nutmeg spice, and that really comes across, doesn't it, with stewed apples? It's like a baked apple pie with that baking spice on top. Just in terms of casks and putting these whiskies together, like I said at the top, there's three of us in the distillery that do the sampling and the blending and the choosing of which casks are ready to bottle and at what strength they should be. Mike, who's one of the original founders, he is really heads up the projects and he's in charge of cask purchasing and kind of the longer term strategy with the spirit. And then Alex, who's our head distiller, and myself, we sit down as a three and we go through all the samples once a month, basically. And where, more the traditional distilleries will have a master blender or one person making those decisions, we do find that having a small team in the distillery doing it does allow for a wider variety of palates to be taken into account and perhaps a more versatile kind of output as well.
Yeah. We've got a question here from Anthony saying, is Hungarian Tokaj casks more available than sherry and bourbon casks?
No, no, you don't see a huge amount of Tokai casks, and I'm not really sure why, because Tokai in Hungary as a winemaking region, it's been making wine for longer than a lot of the more famous regions, like Bordeaux, for example, I believe. So I'm not sure why you don't see more of them. We do struggle a little bit to find them, so when we do find Tokai casks, we tend to snap them up. Um, but obviously, in terms of compared to bourbon casks, nowhere near. And they're also a lot more expensive. So these Tokai casks cost about $1,000 a barrel. A bourbon cask costs about $150. So there's
Mhm.
big differences there too. But you do see Tokai getting used more and more in the industry. Glenmorangie used Tokai casks in their Tale of Cake release that they did well, not recently, but a while back. Glenmurray have done some Tokai releases. Lag have just done one. A few other. Murray McDavid, I think, did a Glengarry in a Tokai, which is quite interesting.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So yeah,
I
you
think
do
I
see
saw
it more and
a,
more.
yeah, I think I saw, was it Single Cask Nation Tokai Liquid or something mad like that? Maybe it wasn't Liquid, but I thought, there's a few of them more of them popping up definitely in the last kind of 5 or 6 years. But it's quite unusual. The more I sit with it, it actually reminds me a bit of because I mentioned Anthony mentioned sherry casks there, but obviously the sherry casks we get are not really, they're not Solero casks, like they're sherry rinsed casks really, or transportation casks at best. But the if you get one of those older Solero cask ones that have a bit more sulfuric flavors, they have a bit more kind of mustiness to the sherry. Kind of, it has some of those elements at the back. The more you sit with it, it's a really interesting cask finish, really is. Frank D says caramel fudge and honey dangerously drinkable. I'll agree with you there, Frank. Um, yeah. In terms of these small batch releases and their kind of popularity, I mean, you were saying about the how quickly they've been selling out recently. I mean, at that price point as well for a small batch is quite good. What are they limited in terms of volume output?
So it just changes batch to batch and product to product. So this particular one was 1,300 bottles because it was four casks that went through the same maturation process on the same days. The cognac that we're going to try later is our largest one that we've done so far, 2,250 bottles. But some of them are just single casks. So quite a lot of them actually, the majority will be a single barrel, hogshead, sometimes a butt. So anything from 290 bottles up to 800 bottles for those single casks. So in terms of value for money, which is always a really important topic, I think, when we're talking about our whiskey, you're getting high strength ABV, you're getting a decent enough age statement on the bottle, you're getting non-chill filtered, natural color, limited, sometimes single cask release, all for around 60 quid. It's pretty good value.
Yeah, no, there definitely is, especially with I'm just answering Paul's question there in the chat, the about how much it is. I mean, after the discount, it's 54.40, so it's 64 before the discount. So yeah, they are as you say, good value for money. Yeah, definitely. And how many of these would you do in a year in terms of small batch
So
releases?
this year we're going to be doing three different parcels of releases, and there's going to be 8 bottles in total. So we've got three new ones coming out in about 1 month's time, which I'm sure you'll be able to find at the whiskey shop when they do.
Yeah, that's good timing ahead of Christmas. This really is, speaking in terms of a month or so time. There's something more I see with this. There's something very Halloweeny about this dram. Like, it has got those kind of uh yeah, kind of October, November flavors in there. It's quite interesting. I could drink it walking through a pumpkin patch or something. The brilliant. Well, we'll come on to the next one, which is the first peated one of the night, and we're going to go with, as was mentioned at the start, the regular peated, not the cognac one next. So just make sure you're picking up the right one. The labels you have, guys, doesn't say that the cognac is peated, but it is peated. So yeah, just as that it's cognac batch two on the labels. So, and maybe while we're getting that poured, you won Distillery of the Year there. Was it last year, a couple of years ago?
hmm Couple
Um,
years ago, yeah, we got Distiller of the Year, which was great. We're very happy with that. Nice accolade.
Marvelous. Brilliant. Did you find it had an impact on people finding you or anything, or
Yeah, yeah,
recommendation?
the in terms of our production and what we put out on the market, and especially if there's a large kind of English contingent in the group in the chat tonight, You probably will, you'll find our products in very much specialist retailers, and you won't find it more generally distributed. And that's because we don't put a huge amount of whiskey out on the market every year. Our annual capacity for whiskey production is about 220,000 litres of alcohol a year, so it's pretty small. And we're putting out on the market about 70,000 bottles a year. But it may sound like a lot, but it really isn't in terms of whiskey bottles, especially as that gets split into about 28, 29 different markets around the world too. And the UK at the moment is actually a very small part of our market. So UK accounts for a small percentage, single digits percentage of the whiskey that we put out there. So, the whiskey that we're putting out there tends to be more widely drunk and more readily available in places such as Germany, the Netherlands, France, Scandinavia, the US. Some bigger markets include Australia, Taiwan, Japan, China, Hong Kong, Singapore, all across there. But the good news is that the UK is getting more and more popular as people gravitate towards these whiskies, and we're getting more and more kind of reach into the UK market. So yeah, I'm not sure what your question was there. I've forgotten.
No, it was just generally around the impact of winning that award. But I suppose that's interesting in terms of those, being bigger in those export markets. Was that a conscious strategy when you launched, that there was easier, because obviously UK is quite a saturated market for whiskey, so the pound spend for marketing and promotion on return is much higher than some of the other markets you've listed there. Was it that kind of strategy, or did it happen in another way? What was the kind of the brand launch that ended up with that split in terms of market share?
It was really where the demand was, and we, as a small business, as a new business, as an independently owned distillery as well, owned by two friends without huge amounts of capital or big investors, it was all about where do we get the most bang for our buck. Like I talked about, the site we started on, it was very kind of pragmatic, and pragmatism is probably the one word to really use when we talk about running our business. And so this year we're at 16 people. A couple of years ago we were at about 12 people, 11 people, full-time staff. So we don't have those big sales teams, and we don't have a lot of people going into, especially the UK, and pushing it into shops and pushing it into bars and restaurants, etc. So working with distributors in different export markets means that we focus on what we do well, which is making good quality whiskey, putting it on a pallet, and giving it to one of our partners who have the sales teams and the expertise to get it into their market. And we didn't have that in the UK because we didn't have that wide network of sales personnel. However, like I say, over the last year or so, the staff and the investment in the distillery has increased quite substantially with a large expansion on the site as well. And so we're increasing our team size, and the UK is becoming more of a priority for us. So yeah, that's the reason why.
No, fair enough. We've got some questions in already about this peated. So Stephen said, what's the ppm value for this peated? We've got how come this one is so dark from Stephen Sir, and then Anthony said fair play for using municipal's Glasgow tap water, keeping it real.
Very much so.
Water in the world.
Yeah, well, the tap water is good, and people often ask me if we use the Clyde water, so you'll be glad to know that's not the case. So yes, on to whiskey number 4. So this is the peated core range. So there's a question there about color. So like I say, everything is natural color. We don't add any coloring into our bottles. As part of our core range, this is bottled at 46% ABV. And one of the reasons for it being so dark is because of the 2 types of casks that we use. So much like the original, every cask that goes into a bottling of peated has been double matured. Initial maturation is within virgin oak. So the new make spirit goes straight into virgin American white oak, coming to us from Kelvin Cooperage in Kentucky. And then there's a finishing period of about a year in first fill Pedro Jimenez sherry casks. So the PX sherry is the darkest, richest, sweetest style of sherry you can get. It's got the high sugar content, and this adds a lot of color into the whiskey, as well as a big viscosity across the palate, and a lovely rich kind of sherry forward character as well. But I think when you're nosing this whiskey and you're taking a smell, this really for me is reminiscent of smoky barbecue sauce. And so I get a lot of people who say, well, I don't like peated whiskey, so I'm not going to enjoy this. But the peat here is actually very accessible. And one of the reasons for that is because we're using mainland Highland peat. So this is peat that's taken from Aberdeenshire. And this gives us a really kind of campfire, bonfire smoke that's quite sweet. So it's this lovely kind of sweet, rich floral smoke, as opposed to your more iodine medicinal character that you might find with other peated whiskies, such as the majority of Islay whiskies, for example. So the use of mainland peat is quite important for this particular style. The malted barley that we use has been peated to 50 ppm. So it's a high level of peat, or a high phenol level into the barley. However, because it is that mainland peat, it is that softer, more welcoming, kind of gentle, aromatic, floral smoke, as opposed to that big iodine style. So yeah, smoky barbecue sauce on the nose. For me, it's quite reminiscent of like meats on a barbecue, and you put in a glaze on top of that meat, and you've got the kind of fat spitting. And then across the palate, you immediately get that big kind of sherry character coming through. So that nice, rich kind of raisins, dried fruits, dark fruit character. And this really nice marriage of sherry and smoke integrating together really nicely. The sherry itself and the use of first fill sherry casks adds to the viscosity across the palate. So it's quite thick, it's quite kind of chewy and chunky. But another reason for that is because when we were talking at the top about the cut points, with our peated whiskey, we're cutting very low to capture the new make. So we're cutting at 57%. So we've got a lot of oily characteristic in here coming from the spirit as well.
Yeah, big time. We got some great taste notes coming in as well. It does have that kind of slow cooked beef brisket kind of flavor for me. Bob says sweet, soft peat, long finish, great PX integration. Nick says very light on the nose. You can get the punch with the taste in a good way. Really long, smoky finish. We got smoked eucalyptus, which is an excellent tasting note from David there. Chris Friend says huge. Full fruit explodes in the mouth with smoke finish. Chinese five spice, says Richard, which is another great tasting note. Frankie says very much barbecue sauce on meat. This is really good on the nose. Sweet, smoky, honey, syrup, and very inviting. Dry smoked haddock, says David. Another excellent one. And smoky maple syrup, fantastic. A malt for Christmas Eve by the fireside. Totally agree. Did you say 55 ppm this was it?
50, yeah.
50.
Yeah, so
Right.
quite a high level of smoke.
It
And
is. You
we
would not have guessed it was that high at all.
no, not at all. But like I say, it's that characteristic of the style of peat that really does soften it down. And this is going immediately into virgin oak. So it's immediately getting hit with this big, really thirsty style of cask. So really kind of it's a very actively matured style of whiskey, this one, because you got virgin oak initially for about 4 years, and that gives it a lot of dark fruit, a lot of rich character. And then you're going into first fill PX, which again is more character, more flavor, big kind of syrupy dark fruits. So that combined with the high ppm, maybe not masks it or covers it completely, but it does dampen down the smoke that comes through because of the very aggressive cask maturation. And so when I was talking earlier about, age is not being the only indicator of quality, this is a really nicely made spirit in these small stills. So it's super fruity. You've got that high ppm level, and then you've got these really good quality casks on top. And, good cask, good spirit coming together. You're going to get a good style of whiskey at a relatively young age. And this is again about, 4 to 5 years old in this bottle. Which, I've had people say they wouldn't have thought that.
No, definitely not. Although Pete can mask the age very well on a lot of these releases, but no, it definitely wouldn't have thought it was that young. The other thing, it does remind me. I know you were talking about the Aberdeenshire peat, but it does remind me a bit of Kilcoman as well. In terms of some of the flavors getting through, particularly maybe the Sanig, maybe that's got that kind of smoked meat kind of flavor that comes through. It's a really interesting dram. We've got some good questions, notes, tasting notes coming in there. Ian says, wow, love this one. The dark fruit and sweet smoke works great with barbecue sauce notes. Paul says this feels very intelligent for a peated. That's I get what you mean. It's kind of sounds condescending though to all the other peated, like all these thick peateds walking around. This is an intelligent peated whiskey. Nick says drop of water brings out the PX. Very nice from someone who isn't a peat fan. Bob says some beef barbecue ribs would be nice with this, accessible to. So this is brilliant. So yeah, there's a few people jumping in on Frank's comment about it being a Christmas Eve malt. Dave says move back to the Tokai and you get a huge caramel hit. I might just do that, David. It's a good shout.
Like a salted caramel for sure. Nice.
It is like, yeah, salted caramel. Oh, exactly. It's amazing. And
Nice.
one has transformed the other. Um,
Yeah.
no, yeah, definitely. I know we're not going to come on to the cognac yet, so people don't jump ahead. But we were talking just before we came live with everyone else on the call. You were saying that the cognac is less peated. Is that in terms of distillation? Is it a different ppm, or how does that work? What's the difference in terms of maybe all your different peated releases and how they're done?
So the cognac cast that we're going to do next, and I don't want to jump the gun, but it's part of the small batch series. So we don't just stick to one style sometimes. So it's actually a marriage of peated and non-peated casks coming together that have all been matured in the exact same way, just to showcase kind of we celebrate our single distillate styles with our core range. Our small batch celebrates the different styles of wood maturation that we can do, and then sometimes we just kind of add the different spirit styles together as well because it gives
Yeah.
us something interesting. What I
No,
would say that's quite interesting with the core range peated is if we consider at the beginning going from the triple distilled into the original and now into this peated, this is a core range. These are our core three whiskies. If you were to blind taste these side by side, you might not necessarily think that these are three single malts distilled by the same distillery, just because they're quite wildly different. And so that's exactly what we're trying to do with our core range, showcase, and I kind of repeated it a few times, but that versatility in the different styles we're making. And this is very much chalk and cheese from where we began with that triple distilled style at the top, which was super kind of elegant, clean, very smooth. This is kind of the antithesis, where it's that kind of rich, oily, slightly dirty style of smoke.
Mhm.
And that's exactly what we set out to do at the beginning, was to showcase that flavor range.
No, definitely. The Richard says, how does this compare to the cast strength version, which has great reviews?
Mm. Good question. So last year we did our batch number ones of the original and the peated, both presented at a natural cask strength. So cask strength release one of each. And this year we'll have batch two coming out in November. And these are the exact same whiskies as we're trying just now with the core range, but we've taken basically a small quantity of the vatting that's gone into a bottling of the core range, and we've just not diluted it at all. So it's just natural presentation. So the idea being that you can see the two whiskies side by side, the 46 and the cask strength, and they are remarkably different. So with the cask strength version, I'd say it feels like there's less smoke because you're getting a lot more of the kind of cask influence and the alcohol content that masks it a little bit. And whereas this one's like a real sweet, like barbecue sauce and those ribs, for me, the cast strength peated is much more like a real smoked ham. It's got this like is it like a Iberico ham, the Spanish kind of smoked
Mm.
ham? It's got a
Yeah, I know what
real
you mean.
distinct note. It's much more, obviously it's a lot more peppery because you've got the higher alcohol content. I think it was 60.8% batch one. Batch two is looking like it's been 60.1%. Um so so yeah, they are quite different. And the cast strength versions, the batch number one was limited to 1,000 bottles of the peated. So very quickly, batch two is looking to be the same.
Marvelous. And when do you think batch two will be out?
November.
November.
So
So
we
around the
just
same time as those other batch releases and that.
yeah, so the small batch, the next three will be out in October, and then the cast strength original and peated batch twos will be out in November. And we've just actually yesterday finished our sampling of the cast strength and signed off the cast to be used in that. So it's quite exciting.
Marvelous. Bob has said, I've got a cast strength PX poured to end the night. It was a limited edition of 80 bottles in conjunction with YouTuber Vin PF.
Yes.
Are
So
you?
Vin is like I say, a YouTuber, does whiskey reviews, and over the last 2 years, his whiskey of the year it was 2 years ago our peated core range, the one we're trying right now, and last year was the cast strength version of this. So he's really got a thing for that kind of mainland PX, big PX influence. And he came to me and he said, is there anything we can do? Because he's done a few bottlings and a few indie bottlings before of distilleries he liked. And I happened to be sitting on a small volume of bottles or something that I thought would be right up his street. It was something we had kind of ready to go almost because it was part of a bottling we were doing for somebody else that didn't quite materialize. But it was perfect for him. Gave him samples and he absolutely loved it. The one that he's got is slightly different from this one here in that the sherry casks that we used in Vin's one, they were all one specific type of PX sherry. So sometimes we use different sherries from different bodegas in Spain, and for that particular bottling that you're referring to, it's all coming from Jimenez Spinola, who are quite a well-regarded Pedro Jimenez sherry producer. And they only make PX sherry, and they've been doing it for hundreds and hundreds of years. And it's interesting you're talking earlier about predominantly the casks we get from Spain are seasoned, whereas the Jimenez Spinola casks, these are production casks. These have been filled with sherry for a long time, and it's been bottled, and you can buy that sherry on the shelf, and that gives us a really interesting characteristic into that particular style. Whereas the PX that we use in the core range has some of those Jimenez Spinola sherry casks in, but then there's a wider grouping of different PX sherry as well. So it's not just the one supplier of PX for the core range.
Yeah, tremendous bodega, Jimenez Spinola. Yeah, that does sound amazing. I need to start a YouTube channel. I've never even heard of this guy. No, that's brilliant. So maybe now is a good time on that note to come on to the cognac cask. There was a question in there in the chat as well about the price of this. For anyone who missed it, this is the same price as the first two core whiskies, so £53 on the website. And I believe, although I'll double check, that the cognac cask is then the same as the Tokai at 64, but I'll just check that quickly in case I'm misinforming the public. But sure, isn't that what you do on the internet? No, it's £64. So perfect, brilliant. So we come on to the cognac cask to attend the night. So yeah, do you want to maybe tell us a bit about this while we pour it and nose it?
Absolutely. So this is, again, part of the small batch series. It was released in conjunction with the Tokai earlier this year. This is at 58%. It is a limited release of 2,250 bottles. And this is a vatting of 5 casks that have come together to create this bottling. 3 of those casks are double distilled unpeated style, similar to the original. And 2 of those casks were double distilled peated. So this is what we've called on the label a lightly peated release. And I wasn't really quite sure which way to go in terms of these last 2 drams, whether to finish on the peated at 46 or to finish on the lightly peated at 58. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to hear feedback from you guys tasting along. But this one here is, like I say, it's a 6-year-old whiskey, 3 years in first fill bourbon casks, and then 3 years in cognac casks. So it's a half and half maturation, even though again we've called it a finish on the label. Maybe it's more like a secondary maturation here. But again, just showcasing not just the fact that we're playing around with different cask types, but this is again blending 2 of our different spirit types together as well for this interesting release. And the peat is much more dampened down in this one. I think you get that straight away. It's still there. For me, the peat is really showcases itself as a lick of smoke across the palate, and it really fills out the palate with that kind of wispy smoke. But what you really get in this one is the cognac kind of elegant orchard fruit characteristics that come through. So the kind of dried apples, the pears, and then the peat balances out quite nicely. Really, really interesting release. It's been pretty popular, this one. It's not got quite the same, I'd say the Tokai is it's a bit of a sledgehammer in terms of its flavor, whereas this one's potentially a little bit more of an elegant, balanced experience in the whiskey.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. If people think we should have flipped the order of the last 2 in terms of peat level, that was actually my idea. I thought the strength, alcohol strength, versus the peatiness might work better. But I don't know if it's because we've done that, because initially this doesn't almost taste unpeated. Totally, I didn't realize how soft it is. It does come through. It's obviously there, but on the first sip, it's just kind of you just get that cognac flavor. You get that kind of I don't know how to describe it. There's like a honeycomb kind of across the tongue. It's really interesting. And it doesn't have initially some of those obvious cognac notes that people tend to get in terms of the kind of pear and apple and that kind of fruitiness. It's got a sweetness. It's a really interesting dram.
I definitely get that kind of richer honey character, the sweetness. Pears, I do get some pears, but more like the stewed kind of poached pear element as well. For me, it's quite creamy too. So you get that kind of like vanilla ice cream sorbet kind of vibes.
Yes.
It's apples, pears, wisp of smoke that fills out the palate. Nice, kind of elegant.
No, definitely, and it's the sorbet, the vanilla ice cream. It's got that creme brulee kind of note to it as well. It's this is a really interesting dram. I don't know if it's because we're on number five. I always often joke with pals who do whiskey tasting, saying start with the best whiskey first and the worst whiskey last, and then and I'm not obviously not saying well that's what you've done here, but I'm saying if you did that, your cheapest blend last, and then see what if people if at the end are like, oh, this is amazing because they're after four or five whiskeys. But this really is a really, really special dram. So far anyway for me. Got some interesting comments coming in. Bob has said, really refined, gorgeous cognac coming through, rich, decadent, and special. Always find it fascinating how whiskey evolves during the dram. Totally agree, Paul. Vanilla with a, excuse me, vanilla with a little bit of candle smoke, says Frank D. That's a good way of describing that kind of smokiness. Stephen Sir says, I agree. ABV over peat for me. I don't think the peated one is strong enough to spoil the cognac finish. Notes are very integrated, nicely balanced, said David. So yeah, this is a really interesting dram. And again, £64, so the same price as the Tokai one as well. So yeah, definitely worth checking out. In terms of those small batch releases that have come out, we've obviously mentioned the YouTubers dram as well, and that. Do you have a personal favorite?
Well, we did a peated version of our Tokai last year. That was absolutely stunning. That was a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed some of our tequila cask releases just because they're super weird and super wonderful, and that's kind of everything the small batch series should be. But to be honest, my favorite ones are the ones that we're working on at any one time, It's always the ones that we're excited about, and we're sampling, like these two that we're trying right now came out maybe a month and a half, 2 months ago. But we were working on these maybe a year ago. It's trying them for the first time and then trying if for the Tokai, for example, that's four casks, but we started with about seven and then chose the four that most complemented each other. And then once you got the casks, you have to decide on the ABVs that you want to bottle it at, because we do reduce all of our small batch series to the ABV that we think is where it's at its best. So for me, it's, sometimes you can come back to these whiskies after they've launched and you've not thought about them for maybe 3-4 months, and that's always quite fun. But it's kind of nature of the beast. You're always looking at what the next thing is. What's really exciting about our upcoming three new releases next month is that they're three cask styles that we've never showcased before. Whereas we have played around with Tokai before, we've played around with cognac before, we've done a cognac release with our peated whiskey before, we've done a cognac release with our triple distilled whiskey before. So these three new ones are kind of exciting because we know people like the cognac, we know the Tokai always lands well because it's really cool and funky and works across the three styles we make. These three new ones are exciting because we'll see what people think of them. One of our most popular releases was launched at the start of this year. It was a Manzanilla Fino sherry cask, matured unpeated whiskey. And that was very, very popular. It sold out in a matter of days, and I still get a lot of people asking me about that one. In the past, we've also done a really interesting release where we chose some triple distilled whiskies that had been distilled in port casks, matured in port casks. And when we were trying them, they're very bright, they're very light, and they were almost a little bit too kind of sweet and one-dimensional. And then we tried some peated Bordeaux red wine cask matured whiskies, and these were quite aggressive, quite meaty, really dark fruit, but maybe slightly too tannic. And when we combined them together in this beautiful marriage, they just really, really harmonized like yin and yang. So that was a really fun release. The red wine ruby port cask finish, we called that one, which was a bit of a mouthful, but it was really good fun.
Yeah, no, it definitely sounds it.
Mhm.
Because David Miller has mentioned, I really love the recent Manzanilla cask, sort of peated. So that's
Yep.
obviously must be the same one you referenced there.
Yep.
The David says notes very integrated, nicely balanced. A touch of burnt stewed fruits, pairs with a touch of cream, another lovely dram. The
Nice.
triple distilled is now even sweeter on the nose. Very well mannered for a cask strength whiskey. Totally agree with that. I'm gonna try it with a drop of water though, which I don't normally do, but there's so much going on here. I feel it won't do any harm. So while I'm doing that, I'm also going to type in the discount code, which is WS24GD. That'll get you 15% off all the the whiskies we've tried tonight. Is there, if there's a lasting thing or impression or comment on Glasgow Distillery you would leave people? We're not going to finish straight away because now is when we'll ask everyone to put in their kind of favorite of the order and stuff, and any kind of last questions they have. But if you had to kind of give one final parting advice for on Glasgow Distillery or something to remember, what would it be?
I would say, hopefully, for everyone who's trying it for the first time, you've enjoyed the variety and the diversity of whiskey that we're making at Glasgow. We're a small team, we're an independent distillery. We're making good quality whiskey, interesting whiskey, and we're putting it out at a good price. So hopefully that is all enjoyed in the way it should be. We are whiskey enthusiasts and whiskey geeks ourselves, making whiskey that we'd want to drink and at a price where we would be able to afford it.
Marvelous. No, that's well said. Got a few comments coming in there. Rab wants us to do one later in the year with the batch races coming in November. I maybe not this side of Christmas, but possibly early next year. Sebastian, if you're up for it, we could see that if all of them haven't sold out too quickly. We definitely love to get you on again. The both yourself and the Drams, fantastic. David has said 43152 for his preference. So he likes the peated, the core range peated the best. So that's interesting. Cognac, Tokai, peated, original, triple. Says Bob. Excellent lineup though, and really hard to choose between them. Super impressive and complex flavors for such young drams, says Paul. 34521 from Graham. So that is the Tokai, followed by the peated core range. Amazing selection. If I'd have all of these bottles in my collection without labels, I would be convinced they were from different distilleries. So a marvelous achievement. Wife got me some for Christmas and I was sold. David's gone for 43512, Paul 43512, Ian 43512, Claire and Ian 54321. So I think the peated core range seems to be the winner on the night, Sebastian. Any thoughts on that in terms of having a core range beating out these really complex small batches?
Yeah, no, I love that. I love the fact, and we find the peated is very popular. And if you like smoke and you like, sherry, then you can't really go wrong. And, happy days. I'm glad everyone found something they enjoyed at the end of it.
No, certainly. David Miller says whiskey shops, single casks. We'll have to talk to my colleague Neil who deals with all of that. Definitely. The guy who says Neil at the whiskey shop when you receive the emails, he's the guy who'll or maybe you wouldn't do it with him anyway, Sebastian. So, but I'm sure maybe you could have this a conversation to be had there. They're also different. Love to give an order of favorites, but I can't sadly. We'll have to order them all. Alistair says 345251. Other than the triple distilled, the four are very close. So rather not kidding the triple distilled. Give some credit to the one. The one is good too. The triple distilled is interesting. It's difficult. It's the same. I mean, it's one of those things. I mean, obviously, Jameson's a bit of a cliche for triple distilled whiskey, but it's one of those whiskies that Jameson would straight away gets lost with interesting complex whiskies. The reason it does 10 million 9-liter cases a year is because it's versatile and easy drinking. So. And I think that as a breakfast whiskey, as people were saying, that triple distilled fits. It kind of tastes nothing like a Jameson, but in terms of the lightness of it, hits that as well. Tokai triple distilled peated, says Richard. Great value whiskies, fantastic tasting tonight. New distillery to me. Really impressed with the quality of drams. They will now be an addition to my whiskey shelf, says Ian. So brilliant. Well, Sebastian, thank you for coming on. And it's been really great to have you. As was alluded to in the chat, maybe. Get you on again in the future. We love a repeat guest here on Digital Drams. So thank you for introducing these fantastic whiskies. As we there's a few head nods earlier on, has been suggested in the chat that this was a lot of people's first introduction to the distillery. So hopefully they're all now converts. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, no, thank you everybody. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Marvelous. Well, folks, the last thing I'll say is WS24GD is the discount code for 15% off all these whiskies. Our next tasting will be with the new Diageo special releases. It'll all go into Plan B in 2 weeks' time. So keep an eye out for that. Should go on sale. Not 2 weeks' time. Sorry, we're aiming for the 17th, I think it is. It's 3 weeks' time. The 17th of October, but it should go on sale next week. So keep an eye out for that. And then we have a really, really action-packed schedule between then and Christmas. One maybe pretty much every week with some really exciting brands. So keep an eye out. The thumbs up from Alistair. So that's great to see. So thanks again, Sebastian, and thanks everyone for joining. And we'll talk to you all again soon. Cheers. Bye.